Thank you so much for the invitation. So as it says here on the first slide, the presentation is going to have two main parts. One is going to talk about terrorism recidivism in Europe, and this is because this is a major issue that we have noticed in Europe, and you will see in a moment why this is so. And then following that, I'm going to talk about a project also. It's more like a science practice project, similar to yours. It's called EUKH, and in this project we developed a framework for the reintegration and rehabilitation of terrorist and extremist offenders in several European countries. Before I go into that, I would like to start with a short story. So on the 2nd of November 2020, Austria had its first jihadi attack in Vienna. And it's remarkable in several ways. First, the individual was already in a deradicalization program, of course a rudimentary deradicalization program at the time. He was known to the authorities. In fact, we even had information that he was trying to buy ammunition in the Slovak Republic. And he was actually already convicted for terrorism, so he was a recidivist. He was actually on parole at the time. Now, all of these features you will see in the study that I'm going to present. But I also want to mention two fundamental things that I think are important for reintegration and rehabilitation. Community was mentioned before. In our experience in Europe, I would say two things are extremely important. One is the fact that the individual has to have a meaningful occupation. And this is important in order to have the feeling that they can still be a meaningful, valuable member of society after obviously failing in their previous activities. And second is social environment. It's really important that individuals actually come back to regular social environments rather than the extremist or the fundamentalist ones in which they used to be. And needless to say, both of these criteria were not fulfilled in this case. The case is also interesting because, I mean, Austria is a small country, right, compared to Germany or other countries. Nevertheless, in terms of foreign fighters, we were number 2 in Europe in terms of numbers per capita. So a relatively large jihadi scene. However, this individual was not a foreign fighter. Yeah? He wanted to go to Syria, but he was stopped. And one of the theories explaining his action is to say as a compensation, right, for not being able to actually do what he was meant to do. He chose to do something at home. Also interesting that he wasn't actually attacking an Austrian target, but a French one. He was going for a French restaurant. So you can see the whole phenomenon is actually quite European and quite globalized. Now, coming back to the actual article, this is something that a colleague of mine from Senor, Eric Haka, and I wrote. So he's the number cruncher. He's the one who has a database on terrorist attacks, starting with 2014. And for this article, he analyzed a number of 105 terrorist jihadi attacks to see what are the specificities of recidivists, right? The study is actually available in the Journal for Deradicalization. It's open source, so you can just download it. And there we looked at three types, three groups of individuals: terrorist recidivists, criminal recidivists, because you might know that in Europe, a high number of jihadis actually have a criminal background in the time of Daesh, and first-time offenders. So what I'm going to talk about here is more of a meta level. What kind of patterns have we actually seen looking at this database and these attacks? So three patterns. First, disproportionate impact. So looking at recidivists, we've seen that the small share of coordinated plots accounts for a large share of casualties, right? So the question is, what do we prioritize in terms of policies? And I will have some slides later on. Another pattern here is when an experienced terrorist is involved, plotting tends to be more organized. And finally, group dynamics amplify impact even when means are simple. So the fact that these individuals were experienced in that sense didn't mean that they actually used more sophisticated weapons. However, the fact that they were organized and acting in groups led to the fact that the impact of their attacks was higher. Another core pattern, we decided to eventually use this word professionalism, right? So professionalism matters. The fact that you already have experience in terrorist structures means that you are able to, in a cynical way, of course, act more professionally. So attacks with a terrorism recidivist often show better preparation and role division. As mentioned partly before, operation choices are quite pragmatic, so they go for low-tech methods, but with a high effect. And interestingly enough, in this case, in this group, very low prevalence of mental health issues. Yeah, so mental health classically is not something that we used to see very often in the case of terrorism. It's something that we saw in recent years, especially in connection to single attackers associated to jihadists. Now, for this group, we see that mental health actually did not play a very high role, and this is actually quite logical because in a group situation, and when you want to coordinate, you cannot do it with somebody who has mental health issues. And finally, evasion and persistence. So as I mentioned also in my short story before, often these individuals are obviously known, right? So, I mean, not just the ones who are recidivists, but also sometimes individuals who are known because of criminal activities or otherwise. In this particular case, we saw that offenders, some of them, had the skills to still remain concealed, although authorities knew about them. Most European countries do have a list of people they surveil, so as to say, but it doesn't always work, right? So this is where the issue of rehabilitation, reintegration comes along. Networking is important, right? So this shapes opportunity, capability, and short windows of opportunity. So as I mentioned before also in my short story, the individual had literally just been released, right? So, and we've seen this as a pattern that when people act again in the sense of terrorist attacks, they tend to do so shortly after release. So this is a very significant, very sensitive period of time that one needs to act. So on this background, a few implications for practice. Still looking at groups. I mean, obviously, single actors are quite prevalent, but in terms of successful terrorist attacks, professional terrorist attacks, groups and group coordination is still important. Monitoring, of course, necessary, but not sufficient. So rehabilitation, reintegration is extremely important if you want to prevent terrorist attacks. We actually need, of course, as a researcher, we always say we need more data, right? So in terms of terrorist attacks and individuals, we don't have that much data as compared to other fields of research, but still nevertheless, and this is something that I think we also say a lot in our scientific committee of the EU Knowledge Hub, it would be really important to actually pull resources from several European countries or also non-European countries to actually improve the data we have and also the weight of the conclusions of our analysis. Finally, clearly, to have very good, very robust post-release intervention. So obviously, rehabilitation, reintegration takes time. Nevertheless, it's important to start right away after release. Some people even say it's actually important to start before release. Yeah, so not just wait until the person actually gets back to society. The program has to run already when the person is still in prison. And now, looking at the practical part, so what do we do with all this knowledge and how can we apply this in practice? There's really many kinds of approaches to radicalization, reintegration, and I would argue that there are certain differences that we need to consider depending on where we are. Context matters. What we tried to do in this project was to understand, first of all, what practitioners need, and we looked at specific practitioners, namely social workers and psychologists in prison probation and civil society to see also what works, what doesn't work, because we have quite a few methods. In the meantime, we have also a lot of risk assessment tools, for example, and then to try to create something which is general enough to be applicable everywhere, but also to allow for specificities. So what we developed is, and this is freely available, if you're interested, you can look online, EUKH.eu. So this is a curriculum that is, well, the aim of it was to offer a full education, all-round education for people who work directly with terrorist and extremist offenders in prison, probation, and in NGOs. It has several components. One is obviously on the topic of radicalization, because it's important to understand, first of all, how people radicalize and why. And then it's followed by a risk assessment section. Here, our partners, actually IPS, they looked at a number of risk assessment tools and put together a new synthesized one that considers all the factors that have actually been validated from these risk assessment tools. And the important part of it is also in cooperation with other partners as well in the consortium, we developed a second component which looks at strengths. So not just to understand to which extent and how the person, poses a risk, but how can we use the strengths and the advantages of the person for rehabilitation? Because we found in interviews with practitioners that, some of them said, well, these risk assessment tools are okay-ish, but my main problem is, what do I do with the information? Yeah? How can I use this information for my practical work to reintegrate the person? So this is why the tool has a second component that basically assesses the strengths and basically then connects them with the risk elements to see which risk elements are basically diminished by these strengths, and also how this then reflects in terms of methods of reintegration rehabilitation. And then we have a component on actually methods. How do I work with these individuals? And also a part that focuses on women, children, and communities. So this is something that not everybody wants to have, so we found in our training it's not always relevant, but in some cases it is. Yeah, this is just a quicker look at, so basically it's an SPJ risk assessment. I think people from the field recognize this as basically, it's not a mathematical tool that gives you numbers, but basically guides the professional in forming his or her judgment. And the risk is examined across multiple domains, as I said, balanced with individual strengths. And then in the end, there's also suggestions for action in terms of how to approach this case, in terms of just staying attentive, monitoring it, or actually intervene. Now, in terms of methods of work, I'm going to be finished in a second. I will not go over the time. We looked at actually quite a number of methods and then assessed them, talked about them with practitioners. And then in the end, we selected a number of them which we found extremely essential for this work. One is alliance building. So how do you actually create a working alliance with the individual? Because this is the most difficult thing to do, like the first step of actually establishing relationship, trust with the person, that you actually can start the work towards rehabilitation. Two other ones are motivational interviewing. So how can I, through discussions, how can I influence the motivation, as you said, the person to change, and then certain cognitive behavioral tools to actually affect behavioral change. So you see, there's quite a few connections here. And also, of course, how to be able to understand and recognize disguised compliance. This is something that we have in Europe a lot, especially in the case of women. So, individuals kind of knowing what to say, right? Because the system, and they kind of play along, but it's without actually being very honest about it. So we have some tools to detect that as well. Right now. Just kind of connecting what I said in those two parts. So, focus on the group and group dynamics. Think about experience as a red flag for your, also for your rehabilitation work. Clearly, somebody who's less experienced is more easy to rehabilitate than somebody who has a lot more experience. Use of strengths to anchor realistic reintegration plans. That reduce opportunity for terror attacks, but on the other hand, open opportunities for pro-social behavior, and do it in an early phase of release. Right, so this is the last one. Recidivism, this is something that I didn't say at the beginning, is actually low, so not that many people are recidivists, but when it does happen, then it has a rather high effect. Professionalism is here quite an important feature, and it often emerges from coordination, not necessarily technology. EUKH is, as I mentioned, an all-round tool course for first-line practitioners working directly with people that need to be rehabilitated and reintegrated. Again, context matters. So this is a warning against tools that just spit out the solution. It's important for professionals to actually be very familiar with the field. Sometimes people say, well, can we do this in 4 hours? Can you do the course? It's like, no. It's something that requires a lot of time, and people need to be invested in it. All right, thank you so much.